Good evening, everyone. It is a joy to be a part of this evening and this education to advocate and then soon to be activated in our lives. We will be approaching Black History Month here, or be in Black History Month in a few days. But we are making history today, and I thank all of you for being on the line. I'm excited about what we will hear today and about the panels that are set. I know we're going to receive a lot of information that would empower us and inspire us. So I pray that you'll take some pen and paper and just not listen, because as we are, excuse me, energized to move forward, I believe our community and our world will be a better place. So before we get started, I'm going to ask the Religious Affairs Chairperson to lead us in prayer. Karen Long.
Thank you, Pastor. Let us pray. Our gracious and most loving God, thank you for giving us the opportunity to gather here today. Thank you for protecting us and for providing the way for us to meet, learn, and grow. As we begin our Stafford County NAACP Educate to Advocate, then Activate series, we dedicate this time to you. We pray for the facilitator, presenters, panelists, attendees, and volunteers who made this event possible. Father, we ask that you bless our nation's leaders, our public officials, and decision makers with wisdom and guidance. We also bring before you the pandemic that has infiltrated our nation. We pray for healing, health, and strength while we ask that you eradicate these viruses. Thank you for blessing our time together. Help us make new connections and gain wisdom to do the work you've set before us. We give you honor and all the glory. Amen.
Thank you, Karen. We're going to now have greetings by Madam President of the Stafford branch of the NAACP. Let me just thank Madam President, you and your staff, Prince Safety, I believe I pronounced that right, for hosting this event today to help us become more secure in who we are and our identity. Will you welcome us, ma'am?
Thank you. Thank you, Bishop Lacey. And good afternoon, everyone. And welcome to the Stafford NAACP's first edition of Educate to Advocate, then Activate. We have an amazing panel of educators and community leaders who will discuss bringing the facts of American history, all of American history, to our students. I've had an opportunity to talk with some of the panelists, and I'm happy to say that you will hear their opinions on the teaching of America's full history and have an opportunity to ask them questions as well. So again, I thank you all for being here. I thank you for listening. And Bishop Lacey, I turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you so much for that warm welcome. To get us started, we're going to have a presentation of information that I think will certainly open our eyes to greater. This wonderful woman of God, Dr. Lorita Daniels, is a successful individual in so many ways. Her resume is just impressive. She successfully defended her dissertation regarding illuminating identities and motivation in public participation and administration of local government. She is an adjunct professor at American University. Again, it's just a great woman of God, part of the school board. I believe she served as vice chair of the Spotsylvania School Board, representing the Salem district. She is also on the faculty at American University. We could go on and on. I met her a few months ago, and just a dynamic, friendly woman of God. So I present to you this wonderful, magnificent, inspiring, encouraging leader, Dr. Daniels. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much for that. Those wonderful words. I hope I can live up to that. But thank you so much. So what I'm going to do is share my screen right now. I have a presentation that I put together to kind of highlight what critical race theory is. And it's just a brief overview. And I'm going to share my screen right now. So give me a second. Hello, everyone. This is the title of my presentation, Critical Race Theory, a Brief Overview. What we're covering in this presentation, what is a theory? Who is Derek A. Bell? The why of CRT. Bell's argument from scholarship and CRT and the media. About me, as Bishop Lacey has already alluded to, I'm a professor at American University. I developed this presentation as an experienced scholar who has examined and read various theories. And I've also published and used theories in my own research. I just want to put this out here. Rules of engagement. This is a presentation just to inform you. There are no editorial comments. I'm just going to talk about the facts. Most of the information that I'm presenting today is documented history. So what I do encourage you to do is do your own research, because that is important. That's how we build our own knowledge. I have also put in the chat box some original resources that you can go back to just read and understand where these scholars were coming from when they developed the critical race theory, and also how they wrote in their own essays. First, I'll start with what is a theory, which is so important here. A theory is a set of interrelated concepts, definitions, and propositions. It presents a systematic view of events or situations to explain or predict events or situations. By Glanswimmer and Lewis. To make it short, it predicts or explains changes in behaviors or environments. So why do we use theories? Theories help us understand aspects of our environment. It helps us make decisions in our own spaces. And it also provides researchers such as myself with a tool to explain behavior. I thought it was fitting to put some examples of some other theories that we may be familiar with. For example, theories of supply and demand, Maslow's theory of hierarchy of needs, theories of leadership, classical conditional theory, theory of evolution, Big Bang theory, theory of justice. These are also theories that scholars use in their research. For us, you may have come across these theories in college as well. Just keep that in mind when I say you may have come across these theories in college, because we even use them today to make projections in our own lives today. Critical race theory. Derek A. Bell, he is the founder of critical race theory. He taught at NYU in law school. Most of his writing was about impacts of law on society more broadly. He also fostered a critical dialogue for the progression or the lack of progression on racial reform in the US. He often questioned the move forward on vital issues such as racial justice. Something else I found out about him was that he was an executive director at a local NAACP branch. He was also offered a staff position for the Legal Defense Education Fund, and he was appointed by Thurgood Marshall during that time, according to Hughes Lieblich and Cleveland. I pulled this slide up because I wanted for the audience to understand the context that he was writing under. He was writing under this particular context when the civil rights movements between 1940, 1960. Keep in mind, these are some acts that were passed, or legislative acts that were passed to ensure that African Americans were being treated fairly in society. So this was the context he wrote under. And I highlighted Brown versus Board of Education because this is where he decided to pull this particular legislation out and write about it, and write about the post Brown versus Board of Education, what is happening, what has happened after this passage, this major legislation. Most of his writing was about improving the lives of African Americans, according to Kiddada de Savic. He wrote on education, and he also wrote on the criminal justice system in terms of law and legal discourse. He became impatient with the progress of the civil rights movement and the law. So this sets the foundation of the critical race theory. This particular publication here, Serving Two Masters, Integration Ideas and Clients' Interest in School Desegregation Litigation. This was the impetus for critical race theory. This particular article reviewed the development of the school desegregation litigation and the special lawyer-client relationship that developed from it. And I put this original piece of publication in the chat box. It was written in 1976. Here's a quote. "We do not expect praise for our legal scholarship that departs from the tradition. We simply seek to understand." And this is basically what he wanted to do, to understand the nuances that was happening in society. So looking at this piece, post Brown versus Board of Education, he realized it was a formal remedy. It was to desegregate schools. It was a mandated racial balance, but he questioned whether it was good or whether it was bad. The other remedy was busing students from one location to another location. And he also questioned whether that placed an undue burden on minority students to be bused 2 hours, 1 to 2 hours away from their home schools. Now, granted, the legal process continued, but by the time it got to courts, students either left or graduated. So he questioned that. Was it really impactful, or was it successful for students? So he had a few hesitations with this outcome. He stated that it ignored the true claims of African Americans, which was inequality in resources and allocation. He also believed that equal education opportunity was possible, but inadequately explored by the civil rights attorneys, because there's a more complex issue there. He also questioned social, political, and economic conditions. He wondered whether this contributed to the loss of school desegregation momentum. And he also realized that the school districts were not complying with the law voluntarily. So this is why he questioned many of the things that happened during the civil rights movement. So he thought there was a need to understand what was going on in society, especially under the context of all these major legislation that had been passed. So he began writing from 1970 to 1976. One portion of his writing detailed how legal remediation for racism in various forms could be considered, but were often ignored. He also used stories on how contradictions were built into the legal strategies. He also examined specific pieces of the legislation, policies, and practices, and realized that they failed to serve the interests of African American communities, according to Kiddada de Savic. This is where critical race theory was born. It guided the initial development, and it also created a blueprint for the use of CRT in universities as an analytic framework for understanding. We had additional scholars that extended CRT and applied it to other fields, such as Kimberly Crenshaw, Patricia Williams, Richard Delgado, and many others built upon this framework. They used the role of storytelling in law and legal discourse. And we also have Gloria Latson-Billings. She's an educational scholar who also built upon critical race theory, but she coined the term cultural relevant pedagogy, looking at the intersectionality of culture and teaching. And of course, this is according to Delgado, and then of course, Gloria Latson-Billings and Tate. So here are some of the main arguments from scholarship. According to Kiddada, the Sophotic, race, according to them, is a permanent fixture in society. According to Clark, racial differentiation, he said, is embedded in societal structures, policies, and systems. Clark also said, according to this particular argument, as he had received from Bell's main argument, was that he encouraged African Americans to accept that race will be a factor. These are all the tenets of the critical race theory that Bell's main argument hinted on. CRT in the media. I thought this was important to bring up because CRT in the media, as we already know, that it's been in the media. And according to Christopher Ruffa, who tweeted this particular sentence, according to New Yorker, he stated this on Twitter. The goal from the start was to confuse the idea into a ridiculous phenomenon. We have successfully frozen their brand, critical race theory, into the public conversations and are steadily driving up negative perceptions. We will eventually turn it toxic as we put all the various cultural insanities under that brand category. So in other words, this was their goal. So the media, newspapers, television, they all picked it up. And this is why I encourage everyone to do their own research and build their own knowledge. Derek A. Bell at New York University, there is an annual lecture on race in American society. They do this lecture every year in honor of him. These are some pictures of him throughout his years, younger years, and I think he died in 2011. But this is Derek A. Bell. Thank you so much for the presentation. I hope this was informative for everyone. Thank you. And what we'll do now is move on to, and these are the reference pages, as I stated before. You should have some information in the chat box. Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we can move on to the next presenter. And I'm going to give you a little history about her. Ms. Kiddada Asmara, originally from the Caribbean, has been a resident of Georgia for 14 years. She has a BA in philosophy, religion, and peace studies, a BS degree in organizational management and human resources, and a master's degree in conflict management. Caring for each other and building strong community are the basic tenets of her belief. Ms. Gray has a deep and abiding love for all people and worked tirelessly each day to advocate that all voices should be heard and that all children deserve a strong educational opportunity. She understands that regardless of where she started, hard work and a balanced mind can achieve anything. I will now turn it over to Ms. Gray, who will provide you her presentation entitled, How Do We Address Shame? Thank you, Ms. Gray. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to be here. It's very special to me, this opportunity to speak, because I'm sitting in Georgia and we're cold. I hope where you're at, I hope you're a little warmer than we are here in Georgia. My name is Kiddada Asmara Gray, and I like to tell people what my name means, and it literally means sister butterfly. So I truly believe in transformation and then being a good sister to my people, all people, honestly. And so I am honored once again to be a part of this, and I will not do a formal presentation with anything on the screen. I personally am overwhelmed by presentations right now. And Zoom, of course, is the medium in which we are working in, but I feel like voice is just as important without all of the words. So when I was asked to join, and I've had plenty of conversations about CRT, I was actually a little surprised about being asked to join because of my conflict resolution background. And I love conflict, appreciate conflict because it does allow us to have really interesting conversations, but then also, hopefully, if we do it well and practice well enough that we can achieve some sort of resolution. And here's my thought on CRT, and I will share this as I've shared this on other panels, is that I don't join conversations or fights that I'm not invited to. I want you to sit with that for a minute, because I feel as if you were a parent of a child that's in K-12, I feel as if we have been dragged into a fight that we did not ask for. Because that CRT, the way that it is taught at the collegiate or master's or JD level or PhD level is not what occurs in K-12 schools. We know this, we understand this, and for a lot of us, the language might be a little different, right? We might not necessarily use the phrase intersectionality in kindergarten. We might hear it in high school, because that is a term that at that level, the high school level, we can understand, right? So I have sat with teachers and been on teacher panels, and I've heard teachers say, yes, we teach CRT, but it's a little different, because what happens in higher level education is very different than K-12. And so I respect that. It was really interesting to hear my bio, because I was like, wait, I'm missing a degree on there. So I have 4 degrees, and I love school. I love research. I love the idea of growing our knowledge base. And with CRT, there has been a misstep. I am also, I am a political strategist. I'm an operative. I say that with a smile. And politics is in which I work in. So I see every day how CRT has been hijacked for the right. I'm going to be very clear. And we do actually have some of our own brothers and sisters who look like me, who are actually a part of the whole entire conversation about CRT and how it's horrible and how we should not do it. But what caught my attention, and I will repeat once again, is that I don't enter into fights that I'm not, that I have not been invited to. And what really caught my attention was that when I hear white parents upset at these school board meetings, what we don't honor, and you'll hear me use that phrase or that word a lot, is the fact that where they're coming from. So their level of anger is based on knowledge that they do not have. They don't have it. Just like, to be fair, we don't have it. So we're playing along in the same long game that they are, trying to figure out what history looks like for us and what it looks like for them. The difference is that when white parents, that fear and anger that we're seeing, see, for me, I come from a conflict space, so I look at life a little differently as a social scientist. So I understand that they're not angry at what potentially could be taught. They're not angry that Martin Luther King is being taught. They're not angry that someone can tell them that it was a Black woman that created an ironing board. They're not angry about that. What they're angry about is that they don't have the language of their own to answer the question when their child comes to them and says, what and why did this happen to my friends that don't look like me? And I pause there because I want to share this with you. A lot of times we are reactionary because we are not dealing in fact. We're really reacting out of our feelings. And I honor that too, because when we don't know what to say and we don't know what to do, our feelings take over. And the CRT fight is really the basis on, from a parent perspective, on guilt and shame, and not knowing how to answer the question. Now, the political side of that is that this is a phrase that we can rile up the base, because we know the base will not do any research. They're not going to go read. No one read about where did CRT come from. It just sounds as if something that they know that should not be done to their children. So we have this dynamic around two conversations that happen in schools when it comes to race or Black history or any type of history that's coming forward. And we're seeing more history being introduced in our schools, except for that we're not having an expansion of African American history in schools. Me as a Caribbean woman, it's very interesting because African American history is my adopted history. I started learning about African American history from my parents. So I didn't get it in history books until I came to the United States, and I didn't really honestly pay attention because there was not much of it. And I didn't take it into consideration because I like to read, I like history, even as a little girl. So I had all of these history books that I would go read about African American history, and history in the diaspora, because to me it's all connected. But what happens and the things that we don't say, and I will respectfully challenge you all because we will have a different discussion about history, African American history in the schools. But I will say this, is that I know that white people sat in the same classes that I did in high school and elementary school, and we got the four same pages of African American history. I honor that experience. So I'm 46 years old. My oldest child is 30, about to be 31. I've got a 22-year-old, a 23-year-old, and a 17-year-old. I can promise you my white friends that I sat in school with in the United States don't have a clue. They have as much African American history that I have. And that's going to be something that some of you all may not agree with me on, because we have an expectation that they should know. I don't know how I can expect them to know when I don't know, when the teachers don't know. See, part of this conversation is, can we be honest enough to say none of us really know? Because see, I like history, and I hope one day I will be forgiven by Syracuse University, because I took an AP class in high school, my senior year, and I got access to the university library at Syracuse University. And I still have this book. I probably owe them $1,000 because I stole the book my senior year, and it was all Black history. And in that, not African American history, but Black history of the diaspora, into which I found out things like there was a Black Pope. I had no idea. Victor I. Who knew? If you knew about the Black Pope, please drop it in the chat. And so I make that distinction because those types of books aren't in K-12. They're not in K-12. I also want you to, all right, Banji, I like that. I make note of the fact that certain books aren't available K-12. They're at higher level schools. They're at higher levels in colleges and law schools. And there's a reason for that. Maybe it's by design. I don't know. I didn't design the system. I just play within it. But what I do know is that shame comes when I can't give you an answer because something I don't know about. I'm not, hey, someone's husband did, I love it. And I'm not a pastor. But what I will say is that in this fight, that there's a portion of me that's like, I've got to give a little grace. See, and I have to differentiate between my political work and my personal life. Because in politics, I get fired up. I get fired up when I have to deal with the Republican Party. Because even here in Georgia, they just dropped 2 bills at CRT. And the one word that caught my attention was this language that said about obscenity. Let's think about that. So what is obscene to your families seems not to be obscene to mine for some odd reason. So in that, once again, that stems from shame. It comes from shame. And I don't know how, let me pause for a second because I need to think this through so I can say this properly. So shame is something that we can carry when we don't know, we don't understand who we are, and we don't understand where we stand in this life. That's for any color. That's for all minorities. I'm also a life coach. And so when I speak to people about shame, I tell people, you have to understand who you are. You have to understand all of your decisions. You have to understand where things come from. Well, here's the thing. If I don't understand how and why and slavery happened and I'm here in 2022, I can't give an answer to my 6-year-old who's more woke than I am and doesn't see that there is all the burdens of my ancestors who have harmed other people. And I did see the question about morals. Morality is something defined differently for each individual person. If you're a philosopher like I am, the morals falls under so many different ideologies on how you want to serve people, how you choose to serve yourself, and how because some people don't even believe that morality is a thing. I just want to point that out there. You can research that. Some people don't believe morality is a thing. And so I don't want to, I'm not giving up the idea that we need to hold people accountable, because we do. What I'm saying is that if I'm going to ask someone to be held accountable, I need them to have the same tools so that they understand what they're being accountable to. We make this assumption that white people know. We make this assumption, well, they know what happened. They know that there was slavery. They know that there was all these bad things. They know that there was all these bad, well, I can tell you my 46-year-old friends, they do know, but they don't understand the weight of it. See, they don't have those conversations that I might have in my family. They don't have those and maybe they don't need to. And I did see the morality around humanity. Well, yes, we should want to treat each other with respect. We should want to treat each other with kindness. Those are standard things but once again, I can point you towards research that people say that is something that a lot of us don't believe in. It's a cultural thing, because part of it comes with power. A lot, and we want to look at it in some respects. We can say we don't have power. Black people may not have power, but I do know we have privilege. We do. And some of you will, Lisa, you're saying a lot, and I'm going to say to you that morals are not actually cultural, because I know some African Americans that I would argue have no morals. I will say that I know that there's some white people that have no morals. I can say that Italians, there's some that don't have any morals. I can say some Caribbean people don't have morals. So that, once again, it is something that is deemed objective, and also it is something that is singular to me and different to you and different to other people. I had to sit with this because I feel like I'm a humanist first, and I want to grace this world with the fact that what God gave to us individually. Right? God gave us breath and life first. That's all I can stand. The second thing I think came with color and what shades that we are in. And I think that what we need to know, most importantly, as we keep having this conversation, is that we ourselves, the minority population, Black people too, hold the same shame that our white counterparts do. So it's different because some of us don't know either. So we don't even know what to tell our own children. And as I wrap, I want to encourage you to not only hold the school system accountable for what you believe they should be teaching your children. Because there's not enough time in the day, there's not enough weeks in the year, there's not enough days on this earth to really learn it all. That's why we specialize when we move up the scale. That's why some of us of education, that's why some of us just go read books. And so understand and know that you have the same opportunities to challenge and not hold on to the shame, because many of our people don't want to share their own history. And in the panel, we'll talk a little bit more, but that's what I want to leave you with. Just a thought around that and how we own our own shame and how do we accept others to understand their own shame in this space as well. So that's what I will say, and thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gray, for that wonderful presentation. And I hope that our fellow panelists and our attendees had an opportunity to take that in and understand what we need to do next. I will move on to our panel. I'm honored to moderate this panel discussion, and I appreciate the Stafford NAACP for giving me this opportunity. I also want to thank the panel for agreeing to be with us today. I want to be clear. This portion of the program is not about critical race theory, but instead it is about hearing from our panelists, hearing their viewpoints about African-American history being a part of American history. We will also learn why culturally responsive teaching is important in our public schools. Without further ado, let's get started. First, I want to ask each panel to briefly introduce themselves to the audience before I head into questions. And I'll start with Dr. Ray.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here. My name is Tiffany Ray. I'm the Vice President of Student Services and Equity Advancement at Germanna Community College. You may or may not know, but Germanna Community College is embarking on a very personal journey for me, but also as an institution in what we're calling our Truth and Reconciliation Plan. It's a plan that acknowledges systemic racism in both our institution and in our community, and how that manifests in the success of our students. And so we're really happy to be undergoing some great change in our curriculum and how we provide student support to be able to rectify that. So I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to discuss this more. Thank you, Stafford and NAACP, for bringing this to the community. It's very important work, and I look forward to the continued conversations.
Thank you. Dr. Garvin-Hudson.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for this opportunity to be a part of this dynamic panel. My name is Brittany Garvin-Hudson. I am an assistant professor in science education at the University of Mary Washington. This is my first year here, but my work really centers on the importance of equity and culturally responsive, culturally relevant pedagogies in science and STEM fields. So I look forward to your questions, and I thank you guys again for this opportunity.
Next, Ms. Muhammad.
Sister Lateefah.
Ms. Lateefah.
Hi, assalamu alaikum. And thank you for having me here. I'm honored. I want to thank Sister Karen for her courage. It's not often that the nation gets to participate with the NAACP. And so this is a historic moment for us. I thank Allah for coming. I thank him for raising the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to give me wisdom and a platform to be able to share, because I don't have it from myself. So I am so grateful. And I'm happy to see Bishop Lacey. I grew up with him in Shiloh Old Site Baptist Church. And so when you see things come full circle and you see the hand of God bringing us all together in an effort that is ours in this day, this is a blessed environment. It is a blessing for every person who is here. And I thank you for allowing us to come. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Is Mr. Cohen here? I cannot see him on my screen, so I wasn't sure if he has made it in already.
No, he's not on this one. Actually, Dr. Daniels, this is all your panel. I'm going to actually move Mrs. Muhammad from this one. Your panel is just an educated panel. She's part of the second one.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate that. And Ms. Kiddada Gray, we heard your introduction, but definitely go ahead and give us some more information about you.
Well, like I said earlier, thank you for having me. I also, like I said, I'm a political strategist and consultant here in Georgia. I also am a conflict strategist with my specialty being in human behavior. And oddly enough, which shocks people all the time, I love adult bullying behavior. And so I do a lot of work in adult bullying as well as adult bullying amongst women. So I love the human population. I have the highest hope for them in specializing in people. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I'll start with the first question. This question is going to Dr. Garvin-Hudson. There is an argument for the need to make schooling more interesting and stimulating for and responsive to ethnically diverse students. And some have even stated that there is an opportunity to have cultural diversity in every subject taught in school. However, we continue to see little improvements in the treatment of ethnic and cultural diversity in the curriculum. So based on your expertise, what pathways do you see ahead for those teachers who believe that they do not know enough about the contributions that different groups have had in science, technology, math, and law to provide this knowledge to this diverse population?
That's a great question. And so what I would offer for those teachers and principals in our K-12 schools who are really looking to engage students in meaningful, impactful learning is to really think about and take a culturally responsive, culturally relevant approach to teaching and learning. This really centers the work of Geneva Gay and Gloria Ladson-Billings and many others, but it brings full circle a lot of the work that I've done and many others that really it's about situating the learning from the lived experiences of your students. It's not a one-size-fits-all model as some people will try to do, and it's not about tricks and tips. And so I will provide a couple of examples of what it could potentially look like, but I preface these examples to just be that, but you want to make sure that you understand your students, right? And it's not a one-size-that-fits-all model. So for example, a lot of people will say, well, science is universal and that science is facts, and you can't really teach it from a cultural standpoint. And I push back against that because that's simply not true. And so for the work and the research that I've done, I like to really just take time to say, hey guys, you know, what is it that you want to learn in science? What are some things that you're interested in taking away from this class? And so I build my curriculum and content with my students, right? So I engage them on the very front end on the first day to say, okay, we're going to incorporate your interest in this course, and this is how we're going to do it. So for me, it's about understanding what the students want to get out of it. And so in the past, I've had students say to me in my courses that they want to learn more about genetics, right? And so anytime we teach genetics, we always talk about Gregor Mendel, the white British monk who did his famous pea plant experiments. If you've taken a genetics class, you've read and you know all about Gregor Mendel. But what I like to say is that not that his contributions aren't important, but the fact that when we're working with African-American students or students of color, one way to kind of help situate that genetics learning is to talk about, for example, things like sickle cell, right? And so bring in experiences that really relate to the population of students that's in your class. So I use that as an example because I've done that with my students, but we use sickle cell as a starting point, helping students understand some of the vocabulary that they're going to do in the biology or the genetics course. And we situate that learning from a sickle cell, but also a malaria standpoint. We talk about some of those advantages or disadvantages that those alleles would actually play in a population. And so I can go on and on about that. But the point of the question is just to kind of help people know and understand that you want to take a culturally responsive approach. Here in the state of Virginia, there's a new standard that centers culturally responsive practices that teachers need to be able to do. I'm not 100% sure how that's going to play out with this new administration, but that standard is in place for teachers to have a culturally responsive classroom. So it's about affirming your students and making sure that they see themselves represented in meaningful ways in your content and curriculum. And so I'm interested to, I'm able to share more in terms of resources for those that may be interested, but this is very important work, and I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, because I do believe it is important that our teachers understand that if they're teaching a population of students that is ethnically diverse, they need to also connect with those students through, whether it's through symbolic curriculum, you know, on the making symbolic curriculum in the classrooms, or just connecting with them through history, through books, bringing extra materials to the classroom. So thank you so much for that presentation. This question goes to Ms. Gray, and this speaks to Virginia. The Commonwealth of Virginia has made African American history high school class optional for students that will like, for any student that would like to learn more about African American history. However, there are some people who believe that African American history should not be taught as a separate subject apart from American history. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a tough one. I think that my first instinct is to say that it's a hard sell. Because people, once again, I'll go back to shame, I'll go back to, because I don't think that if we want to have all-inclusive classes and have all-inclusive understanding of the United States, it shouldn't be a class full of African-American students, right? So who's the body that we want first in the classrooms? So I think if we start there, I think that is the first thing that we can understand, just as well as Virginia is very interesting because you all actually have a wealth of information that is present at the moment and really accessible to you over in Williamsburg, Virginia. I drive to Williamsburg just so I can go read and do a lot of research. And I will never say that I think the American government in certain school districts is optional. I think that's very interesting. But I think we want to play, it's human nature. It's almost actually westernized to kind of feel like we get to choose on what it is that we learn, even though that we have shortfalls. I say all that to say that I would probably lean towards making it mandatory. You can actually shorten the schedule on it and intertwine it with African American history. But like Dr. Hudson said, though, how do you get that information? Because does that mean is it an African American teacher who's teaching that? Is it a white teacher that's teaching that? Because I know that African American history at the collegiate level, those are electives too. So to get really specialized in an in-depth research and understanding of our history, that is an elective. And I think people don't understand that. And when you honor that from that place, what looks from K to 12 or in high school, once again, is very different. Because like I said, I work with people who are in politics, who want to run for office, that don't even know how the American government works. And they probably opted out of not taking American government, and there's always a 3 or 4 pages inside of a book that what the curriculum dictates that we need to know or should know, and that's enough. And I think, once again, that it is very, very interesting because there is a breadth of African-American knowledge that is sitting right there in Williamsburg. And I would probably lend itself more to say, go have a day or a field trip as a starting point and take your children to Williamsburg to go hear that history.
Thank you, Ms. Gray, and that fits in your earlier comment about parents being more responsive and taking their children out to learn about their history, because that's one way that you mentioned that in your culture, in the Caribbean culture, that your parents taught you about your history. So that's fitting. Williamsburg is definitely a great place to do that as well. This question goes to Dr. Ray. Studies have shown that teachers understand that when teachers understand culturally responsive caring is an action by teachers to ensure the academic success for diversity of students, they begin to see the academic potential of all students. However, we know that this may require some extra efforts by the teacher. How is your office supporting these teachers who may go above and beyond to ensure that these students are successful?
Thanks for asking. And obviously, since I work at the college level, there's certainly a lot more flexibility we have with the type of instruction we can offer our students and the type of professional development that's available. I think we have a lot more liberty and freedom with our curriculum than I think has occurred in K-12 and probably will continue to occur in K-12. I think as part of our Truth and Reconciliation Plan at Germanna, it's been a commitment on our part to not just say we want to be an anti-racist institution, to not just say we want to make sure that our faculty are adequately prepared to deal with the diverse student populations, to also deal with diverse content and to help those students succeed, but that we wanted to provide the resources to make sure that we could fulfill that commitment. We recently were awarded a $2.1 million grant from the federal government. It's a Title III Strengthening Institutions Program grant. It allows us to support underrepresented populations with student services and culturally responsive instruction. And so that's part of our commitment. We also have made it mandatory to do professional development around culturally responsive teaching. And we take the approach of universal design. And so anytime we're designing a class for both online, in-person instruction, we know that if we do that really well, the benefits are for all of our students, not just those students of interest. And so it's been a commitment of ours previously, but now I think we're really putting our money where our mouth is to make sure that we're able to follow through with some of these promises. And look, everybody's on a different end of this spectrum. We have some faculty who are ready to go. They were prepared for this. They've been training for years. And we have some instructors who are like, I don't really know what you're talking about. I'm here for it, but I'm gonna need some help. And so we're really trying to meet faculty where they are and where they are with the information that they have to make sure that we're providing what's appropriate for them. The other thing we wanna do is hit it from the actual contextual piece. So what types of course materials are we using? What types of instructional design are we employing in our courses? All those things are looking on. It's easy to say, teacher, teach this. But if we're still using the same old textbooks, the same old course materials, if we're still using the same types of things that haven't really suited us in the past, then we're not going to make much progress. And then the last piece is we want to support this co-curricularly. So there are a lot of things our faculty and staff can do, but there are a lot of things that we can help our students understand. So we want to make sure that we're supplementing what's happening in the classroom with things outside of the classroom. So what are we providing through leadership opportunities? What are we providing through student activities? What types of exposure are we giving our students to all the history? I think Ms. Gray mentioned this in our community. We're in the backyard of George Washington's childhood home and Civil War. So how are we providing that context to our students as well? So there are a lot of different things that I think we need to do holistically, but most importantly, just realizing that these things aren't easy and these things are just not something that you direct, that there are resources that are needed to make sure that we can bring folks up to speed so that we're able to fulfill those things for our students. And I think what we get from that is a more successful student, a more well-rounded student, and a more prepared student to enter this world that is becoming increasingly more interesting as the days go on. And so we need to make sure our students are prepared for that.
Thank you, Dr. Ray. I certainly agree with you when it comes to getting everyone up to speed, but in order to do that, we do need the resources, right? That's like number one. You have to have those resources. You have to have people in place that are ready to move this forward, because without any of that, it remains stagnant. So thank you so much for clarifying that information that what your office is doing to support this effort. My next question goes to Dr. Garvin-Hudson. Some people believe that symbolic curriculum is one way that teachers can expose passive knowledge, skills, and morals and values in the classroom. What are some of the things that teachers can do to help convey this information, despite some of the negativity surrounding teaching of what some have called controversial history and others have called factual information about African Americans, Asians, Latina, and Native American history?
Right, so that's a great question. I think that as we embark on these challenging days ahead, especially in the education realm, it's important that we provide all of our students information that showcases the contributions and the work of diverse people. I think when I think about how textbooks and education has traditionally been taught, it's very Eurocentric and it's very male dominated. And so we want to make sure that we highlight the contributions and the work of all people in very meaningful ways. And I always go back to a culturally responsive framework, because that really is the lens through which I view teaching and learning. And I think about, James Banks's work in terms of multicultural education, because you can't talk about CRP, culturally relevant pedagogy, without talking about James Banks, his work in multicultural education. And so really thinking about it beyond the contributions level of heroes and holidays, right? Those things are important, but you want to have students dig deeper and get to some of those deeper levels of learning. And so really kind of thinking about, if I'm in a particular class, so I like to provide examples so that it's tangible and digestible for folks. And so if I'm in a class and I'm talking about, science, right? And I want to make sure that this is meaningful. We can talk about the impacts on the environment, but looking at it from an environmental justice perspective, right? So all of the water crises that have taken place in Flint, Michigan, what are the impacts of that on communities and populations, and having students really think critically about what populations and communities are being affected. And then just really digging in from there. I mean, there's so many different examples that we've seen of inequities, but having students kind of, develop that socio-political consciousness that Gloria Ladson-Billings talks about in her work, but also the cultural competence piece. It's, again, this work, I think a lot of people think, oh, well, that's just for Black kids. It's not just for Black kids, it's for all kids. And so once we understand the history and contributions of all people, then we can really make strides to really move things forward in a very impactful way for our learners. And so I think it's important to do the heroes and the holidays, the contribution level. So we talk about, Dr. King, and we talk about Rosa Parks, and we talk about all of these amazing people that have made contributions in all of our communities, but we need to move beyond that, right? And dig in deeper and help students contextualize it. And it shouldn't be relegated to just a single month. It should be something that we do seamlessly throughout the year. And I think that's one of the arguments with this work, that we celebrate Black History Month just in the month of February, Women's History Month in the month of March. But taking a cultural responsive approach is not just about celebrating or relegating an entire history of people to a single month. It's really about trying to interweave it throughout your content and curriculum, 365 days a year in a very meaningful way. So I just want to kind of put that out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hudson, because I do believe that is something that we can do as a country. Weaving various histories throughout the curriculum. And so you hit on a very good point, that is all kids can benefit from knowing about all ethnicities and what their accomplishments were in society in general. Before we move on to the next question, we just had Mr. Cohen to join us. I would love for him to introduce himself, and then I'm going to ask you a question as well. I don't know if you could, I can do two things at one. I can have you introduce yourself and then ask a question right after your introduction, or I can go ahead and give you the question, but I don't want to confuse you, but go ahead and introduce yourself first, and then I'll come back to you with a question.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes, I'm Tom Cohen. I teach at Colonial Forge High School. I've been in Stafford County for about 30 years. And before that, I was up in Arlington for about 5 or 6 years. And before that, down in Florida. I teach social studies. I've also taught at Germanna back in the day, and then at VCU and at Randolph-Macon. And usually my area of expertise is American government. This year, I'm very fortunate again to have all AP government. But I have a very diverse population. When I received Teacher of the Year at Brook Point, one of the things that they touted was that year after year, I had the most diverse AP class in the county. And so I'm very proud of the fact that I still have that. And I reach out and I have special ed students that take my AP class so that they can get exposure to college classes, so they know what college will be like, and that they see it's for them as well. So I'm an old goat. I'll just put it that way.
Awesome. Well, welcome aboard. Congratulations for being chosen as Teacher of the Year and for having the most diverse class in AP, because I think that is also important that our kids get exposed to the higher level courses as well. So one of the questions, and this is very fitting for you then, one of the questions that I'm going to ask you is, what are your thoughts about history books focusing more on narratives of slavery and the consequences over the accomplishments of African Americans throughout history? Can you talk briefly about the advantages and disadvantages of one over the other?
Well, it's really interesting because when I started teaching in Arlington in the 90s, there was a movement to make the curriculum and the textbooks more diverse, both with ethnicities as well as with gender. And when I moved to Stafford and started teaching in Stafford, that movement was still going on. And then I've been involved with textbook adoption and SOL creating and pacing guides on the state level. And that's been a trend that's been going on since the 1990s. And then if you saw the newspaper this week, you saw that the Potomac tribe, many members there of their tribe are saying they should have more of their history brought into the classroom as well. So this is an ongoing change that has been happening for many decades. Textbooks, the most recent, I would say the teachers who have graduated from college in the last 10 to 15 years, as a rule, don't use textbooks. In all the textbook adoptions, there's been far more elements of different ethnicities and different genders. However, many of the teachers who are coming out of the colleges just use them as ancillary. And so they'll have them in the classroom if the students need them, and then they use outside sources rather than use the textbook, because most of those newer teachers are more internet savvy, more creative, and pull in different things and different elements to make the class more applicable to their population. And I heard Dr. Hudson and Ms. Gray and Dr. Ray, I'll touch on these things. We have this cross purposes. You want to know what your population of your class wants, and your class may be different each class period. And we've been working on that for decades, where you sort of tailor your classes. There's been a movement for decades to have pre-tests, so that if you, and I hate to pick a European topic, but if you have teaching a class in European history, and most of the class already knows about Napoleon, but very few know about the First Republic, you would take that time in your class period to spend more time on that First Republic and not on Napoleon, because they already know it. Counter to that is what we're getting from above, which is this mentality that if you're going to be in a social studies class at Stafford High School or whatever school, and you move to another school, at the same day, at the same time, the teacher is supposed to be teaching the exact same material, which makes it very difficult for what Dr. Hudson was talking about, whereas, my population is this, let's pull in these elements that will make them excited and make them interested. But if we're all doing the same thing on the same day, you can't do that. And so many of the teachers are getting that cross, what they think they should do and they're told to do in college, and then what the various systems are telling them to do. And then you have the ever popular SOLs that they feel as though they have, a lot of times they will be evaluated on how well they do with the SOL. So some of them have digressed into just teaching them what's on the SOL and not going farther. The teacher that I've worked with and have most respect for will teach concepts, and that will tag into the SOLs, but they can bring in this extra material and make it more interesting. So going back to the textbooks, I think the more and more we get into this, the less and less relevance textbooks have in social studies, because there are so many other sources for that. Fortunately, I don't deal with science, so I'll leave that Dr. Hudson. But different other areas, I think, from those teachers that I know from working in governor's school, those teachers as well pull in other material that is not in the textbook because at least at our site, our governor's school population has always been diverse. And so they've made a point of bringing in different elements because that's their population. So if that makes sense.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Corin, for that. I mean, because it sounds like flexibility is also the key to this as well. Teachers knowing that there's some elements that need to be brought in because their students may not be familiar with that. So I think flexibility, I think Dr. Ray talked about that as well. Flexibility in a college setting is definitely there due to the resources, but sometimes Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, they set SOL standard, or they set the standards, and then they have to teach to those standards, but at the same time, giving teachers some flexibility to bring some of that conversation in for those students that may not be familiar with certain parts of the history. So thank you so much for that. I'm going to move to now Ms. Gray. I'm going to come back because I'm trying to ask every panelist at least 2 questions And so I think now I'm on Ms. Gray. So Ms. Gray, my question to you is, can you briefly talk about some of the educational challenges that you see around the world today? And I just want to hear from your perspective, what do you see going on in the world today?
Thank you for that question, because I actually got my political start in educational advocacy. So I think that one of the things I'm going to call parents to task, because there seems to be a disconnect between what we feel should be taught, what we know is being taught, and what we assume is being taught as parents. And that connection only can be intertwined together and leveled if we have more parent participation across the world in school districts. And that's a different kind of, culturally, sometimes that's a different field, because certain cultures don't want to interact with teachers and administration, because that culturally is not how it's done. It's a power dynamic. And then other places, it is almost expected. Here in the United States, it is really expected to be a part of, as part of participatory democracy, one of the things that I love, and we should have that more in schools. The other thing is, do we know what is actually being taught in schools? I don't think a lot of us really understand. And that takes time, honestly, to figure out. That is of interest, if that is of interest to you. I think there's a lot of assumptions made, as we can see in the fight with, what the CRT principles are, what we think is being taught in school. I also feel that a lot of our teachers are also disconnected, and they disconnected more so because they don't have a voice. They themselves can't advocate for what it is that they need in the classroom. A lot of teachers are state employees, like in Georgia, they're state employees, so they can't advocate for themselves. If they don't have a strong teacher union, if they don't have say on the curriculum teams, just like, we need to know how school works. There should be, at all levels of school, a school 101. From the time you enter into kindergarten, your parents need to know how to interact with the school district, just like teachers need to know how to interact with school district. I know that I've met teachers that are kind of confused with upper level part of the school, from the superintendent down, from the Board of Education, all of these things that are interconnected and intertwined, that kind of provide gaps for us of lack of understanding. The other thing that I would share is, from a political side, this idea of local control, because who you elect locally dictates what you get to learn. We don't want to honor that for some odd reason. And so, or maybe just parents just don't know, maybe political officials don't understand. But I know that of the legislature, sometimes should not be dictating what should be taught in our schools. That's not what the law, that's not what I put them in there for. That I'm hoping that the Board of Education can create ideas and so forth, and gather information for all of us to be inclusive. I know someone said all of our history should be taught. Okay, well, history in the United States was created based off of what the Daughters of the Confederacy put together. So now we are in 2021, and that was done. I don't even know when the Confederacy, when they came together, but that one's a history books. That is what dictates what is in our history books. And in 2022, we are still trying to layer into history parts of people that have been here. For the Indigenous friends to say, hey, you have to add us, and they were here first, is amazing, right? We should all be stunned by that. That should be a given. The fact that we have to honor Asian Americans in a different way is very interesting. We're starting to see across the country, and I mean across the world, even if it is in Europe, we know that there were people of different skin colors in Europe. So part of European history, there's missing because we don't know about African Americans or Blacks from the diaspora that have had contributions. So I think that across the world, there needs to be an honoring and some type of reconciliation around how do we honor the people that are actually here. You know, I think a lot of us probably watch Bridgerton. Bridgerton on Netflix blew up. I mean, we saw Black and brown people in powerful positions. And I remember having conversations with sister girls going, wait, were there Black people then during that time? Like, I'm not too sure. Were there colored people? Were there minority people? And we know they were. They're just written out of history. You know, yesterday was International, I think, Holocaust Remembrance Day. I actually, because of my peace studies background, I went to Europe. I went to school in Europe so that way I could study the Holocaust. And it was so fascinating to me that what's erased once again out of that particular portion of history is that there were Black people that were killed during that time frame. We don't even know that. So that is one of the things that until we start asking enough questions, until we start looking for our own representation, we are always going to have these challenges, because simply when we don't know, and we don't know, the question is, I leave all of you with, as I kind of had this in my head, who do we go and ask for that? Because it's our PhDs that write these books, that gather the history to put this information in books that most people don't read. So until we start asking and wondering and pushing forward, I think that those are the things that I'm starting to see more and more of. That Black and brown people are just like, wait a minute, I know we're here. If I can see it in Bridgerton, I know we were here, and we know that we were here all over this country and all over the world.
Thank you so much. I truly believe in advocate for and educate ourselves, you know, when we want to learn about any history. Thank you so much, Ms. Gray. My next question is going to go to Dr. Ray. Our population, as we know it, is increasing. It's becoming more diverse. And we're seeing the same trend, not just in K through 12, but also in a college setting. Can you make a case for why it's important for our leaders to support culturally responsive teaching and curriculum diversity, which are all reflective of our diverse population?
Sure. So to me, if you're not moved by kind of the social justice imperative that this culturally responsive teaching offers and provides for our communities, if you're not moved by kind of the moral imperative, then you've got to be moved certainly by the economic imperative, the workforce development implications, et cetera. So if you're not, you know, weepy and terribly, you know, heartfelt, we can move away from that and say that we are building a citizenry, Invisalign. We're building a group of citizens who we want to make prepared for the world, who we want to make sure provide our very vital workforce in our communities. And that community is ever changing, as you mentioned. So by 2050, we should be a majority, what used to be minority country. That's very important. That means that our white male population that tended to fill jobs, that tended to be the predominant consumers of education and science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, all of these things, it's going to be that much more important to make sure that we're bringing in communities so we can fill those very vital positions in the future. And if that community is going to be more diverse, then we need to be prepared to have the structures, political systems, policies that respond to that diversity. So there's an economic imperative to making sure that our students now are prepared for that future. There is a workforce development implication to making sure that we can fill those specialized jobs, those much needed jobs. To me, I think the moral and social justice imperative is enough, but certainly we've got to have thriving communities. And to do that, we need to make sure that our students are learning now the important things that they need to learn and the way that they need to learn them to be able to operate in our ever-changing community.
Thank you, Dr. Ray, for that. It's so important that our students embrace what's currently here and understand where we all need to go to make this a productive society. My last question for today, and then I'll wrap it up, goes to Mr. Cohen. What advice do you offer to district and state leaders in ensuring that all students are learning about other cultures in a meaningful and engaging way?
Well, and I mean, to a certain degree, the process has been going along. So whenever we have new teachers and or new people coming in as coordinators, I try to push that aspect that we need to make it as inclusive and use examples and again, from more social studies standpoint, more historical aspects that are more inclusive, that broaden it to make all people see that how they can take part in systems and work. When I was on the state commission for civics education, there had been a big move towards having another SLL test as a barrier to graduation, and B, the material would be that they felt, many of the members of the commission felt that all the students should know all the governors of Virginia. And my argument, and there was a principal on the commission as well, from Hampton Roads area, I believe, we kept pushing that many of these people are not going to live in Virginia. They're going to go to college or go elsewhere in this country. So therefore, knowing every single governor of Virginia is not what is necessary. The skills of knowing the government or knowing what governors do and what state governments can do, that is a skill that they should know, not the minutia of, what each governor's favorite thing that they accomplished. And so that was one of the things that I pushed on the commission, was that you have skills that are more important than the minutia of things. And then in the classroom, I try to bring up examples when we're dealing with the Bill of Rights and such that make all the students aware of different elements in our society that they don't know. And I point out that there's things that I didn't know until somebody tells me, and then I notice it. And so that often creates individuals who in the classroom to go down to the lunchroom and have conversations and or sit at tables with other individuals that they normally don't sit with, and interact and say, hey, I didn't, does this happen to you? How do you react? This, that, and the other, which other people come up to me and say, what did you do in your class? Because people are just continue to talk about this stuff. So I think it's a part of it is making people aware of things that they don't know. At least I found that to be very helpful. If that answers what you're getting at.
Thank you, Mr. Corey. It certainly does. And I'm going to end this discussion, but I do want to thank the panelists for offering their insight into making our school communities more inclusive of all cultures. I want to thank them for their presentation today. Anyone that asked any questions, I would make sure we get those questions to the panelists so that they can provide a follow-up answer during the next part of this presentation or during it. So thank you again for the attendees. If there are any other follow-up questions, please reach out to the panelists, and we look forward to furthering the discussion in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll turn it over back to Bishop Lacey. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Daniels and the panel. Thank you for giving me such a tremendous education this evening. I have received a lot, and Scholar Gray, I want to express my gratitude for reminding us about lack of knowledge and not being able to respond, and what happens when we don't have the knowledge to move forward. So I thank this panel so much for sharing with us and bringing us to a place where we can dig and research and come to this place of knowing so we can share. Thank you so much. Well, I have the privilege of facilitating this next group of outstanding individuals, and I will ask them to introduce themselves to the community that has joined us. So we will start with Miss Muhammad, if you would, and then we will follow with Apostle Larry Brown, and I believe Chaplain Abdalla, if you would. Thank you.
Thank you. And once again, Assalamu alaikum. I had the chance to do the brief introduction with the first group, but I am an educator with the Muhammad University of Islam education system in the Nation of Islam. I've had the opportunity to study for the last 40 years under the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan as a student. And my degree comes from Hampton University. I've had the opportunity to work with Lake Farm Schools, the James Farmer Program, James Monroe. I started in Stafford County. So again, I feel it's very appropriate that I have the opportunity to come and address education in Stafford County, what it was then, where we are now, and the issues that are on the table. So thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Pastor Brand, turn your mic on, sir. Unmute.
Yeah, I've been off so long. God bless you. I've enjoyed everything I heard so far. I mean, wealth of information. Very briefly, I'm happy to be invited to the panel. My background is a former Marine instructor in the schoolhouse, so I have some educational experience. Father of millennials, senior pastor of Spirit of Truth Deliverance Church, which is now in Stafford. And probably more importantly, because across many areas, is the president of the Heart Community Initiative, which we do a lot of things. And lastly, I want to say this: I am a recent and proud new member of the Stafford NAACP.
Okay. All right, Chaplain. You are mute as well. If you could unmute.
Definitely did not. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Assalamu alaikum, peace, shalom to everybody. Thanks again for the presentation that the previous group gave us. Appreciate that a lot. My name is Chaplain Munira. I was born in Kenya, came to the US in 1988, has been in Spotsy for 20 years now. Interfaith leader, chaplain at Mayor Washington Hospital, did my residency there. Started a nonprofit organization in 2008 called the Imani Multicultural Center. Before that, I was the refugee coordinator for the Catholic Diocese of Arlington here, and then started the Imani. And also the executive director of Islamic Ummah of Fredericksburg, interfaith leader. I mean, we all do the same things, Dr. Lacey, right? And so my name, it's amazing. I'm glad my parents chose my name. My name is Munira, and it means a beacon of light, and I'm trying to be that. Salim is my dad, and his name means peace, and Abdalla means basically a servant of God, and that's who I am. Currently focused on the Afghani refugees who now are brothers and sisters in this community, and there are a lot of them. And so the cultural aspect, yeah, we all need to know each other. And by knowing each other, it's those differences that God put us in this world to know each other, respect, and be compassionate. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And we also have with us Pastor Felicia Allen. Would you introduce yourself, ma'am?
Yes, I will. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so honored to be here on today. And thank you, NAACP, for hosting this, to all the phenomenal speakers who have educated us today. Thank you so much. I've been in the community for over 20 years. I'm the co-pastor of Agape Fellowship Ministries. And strategically, we are trying to address the many disparities in our community, dealing with education and definitely dealing with the food deserts that we're experiencing throughout our region. Professionally, I am a certified grief counselor with Capital Caring Health, and I'm also a board certified chaplain. And Munira is one of my colleagues when I used to work at Mary Washington Hospital, so it's good to see her also. And as a pastor in this area, we are concerned not only about the physical well-being of our community, but about the spiritual well-being. Because regardless of what your faith tradition is, it's imperative for us to speak to the spirit of man as we speak to the physical being of man. And I'm so happy to be here today.
Okay, well, thank all of you for joining. I will pose a few thoughts to you, want to hear your responses. I'm pretty sure that those who are in waiting want to hear us as well. We are indeed, as Pastor Allen mentioned, a part of the faith community, and what we say and what we do also have an impact. We also heard the previous panel speak to us. I just want you, and I'm going to start with Ms. Muhammad, what thought or reflection do you have regarding what the first panel shared with us?
Okay, thank you. Before I start, I'm wearing a mask because I'm having some dental work done, and a couple of people sent notes about it. So I'm doing my best to speak clearly so that you can hear me, okay? But
Okay.
I am so grateful to the earlier conversation. Again, as many of you have said, it was a deep learning experience. Dr. Gray really impacted a lot of things for me and got me thinking on her closing question, but on some of the comments that she made on the inside. And she said, who do we go and ask for that? Where do we get the truth of history? And I'm thankful for Pastor Allen for starting off this panel by saying, dealing with the spirit. And so what has been written out of history is the fact that we are indeed a spiritual people. They didn't just enslave our bodies, but they removed our spiritual base. And so inside of us, we have the DNA that gives us the answer that the sister asked about. We're coded, we're made by God. And so the histories that's coming up today, the questions that the young people are asking today, they're coming from a spiritual base. That the truth of our sojourn in America has to be told, that we are not the sum total of 500 years here in America, but we came with God. And that history has to be told. We put sun, moon, star out there. So putting prayer back. When we took God out, a lot of doors shut in education. And it allowed a lot of people to miss the truth. So as Sister was saying about the shame, it's shame for maybe 85%, like she said, who don't know the history. They don't know what their grandparents did or great-grandparents did, but the architects of this education system, they know what was done. And it is that truth that's coming to the surface. You know, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan shared with us recently, the lie and the liar has to be exposed. And so that has to be done in education because that's the root of everything else that you have. God said, in the beginning was the word. We were forced not to read. The Holy Quran says, read in the name of God. We were forced not to read. So we lost our culture, we lost God, we lost morals, we lost family, we lost economics, everything that it takes to be an educated and civilized person in this society, we lost. So this panel, I am so thankful again that you are broaching this subject in a county like Stafford County, because many things have come out of Stafford County that many of us who grew up here know. So that's what I got to start off with, Bishop Lacey, and thank you for asking.
Yes, thank you. Pastor Brown, would you respond to the same question? I was just so inspired by the panel and some things that start me to process and thinking my own lack and the additional things I need to do. What are some of the things that you received and appreciate from the previous panel?
I appreciate the question, Bishop Lacey, and I honor my fellow clergy. Respect what you're doing in the community. And I too have some takeaways. I like the presentation on shame because I took it personally because I have to acknowledge, if we're going to be honest, some things I didn't know, and shame on me. But shame need not be permanent or contagious. We learn and we move forward. Although the original presentation was about critical race theory, I did a lot of research on that, but I didn't go into the depth that one presenter did with the PowerPoint, but it's so much information there. But my takeaway is critical race theory is not new. What is going on is resistance. And unfortunately, it falls into the category, in many cases, even if you don't put racial, it's basically inequality. I look at it from a position of fairness. If we teach other nationalities or other histories to other races, why not teach American history and tell the truth? If I change the terminology from critical race theory just to say critical truth is facts. So, and facts can be painful, but let's tell the truth because it is factual. And when we tell the truth across the board, fair and balanced, we all learn, we all gain, and we move forward. If we want to come and whitewash, pass it by, smoke screen, it's not important, don't worry about it. We've heard this for I don't know how many years. It's time to face the truth. And the fact is, there's opposition, not for good reason. It's opposition just to keep a race down. And I'm not just talking about Black, so you can add the brown. I'm talking about just basically if you are non-white, the implication is something's wrong with you. So I could say so much more, but we are addressing this, I know as a pastor, and I'm certainly addressing it as the president of Hartford Community Initiative because we come from so many areas of need, spiritual, practical, social, working across racial barriers, across different denominations. So in this country, we can change, and we must change. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Chaplain Abdalla. Unmute, please.
What Dr. Gray was talking about, truth and reconciliation, that's what got me right there. Again, it comes back to the truth. Is it his story that they're telling us? And that we need to wake up and do and research our own true history, not his story, but our own history. We need to know that. We shouldn't wait for people to tell us who we are. And there's too many lies going on. And so our kids in the schools end up thinking, being forced to learn the lie. Because if you don't answer to what the answers that they're looking for, so you failed. And we know that the information that's given there to our kids, half of it is not true. So this is wonderful that the NAACP Stafford is doing that, and it should be one of many, many, many more to come. It should be a continuation and not an American History Month thing. No, it should be our lives so we can educate our kids. Like the others mentioned, if we don't know, how will our kids know? And if we're depending on the books or what they are taught in school, they really don't know where the parents are coming from. And that includes everybody, not only the African American. I was born in Kenya. You know, I need to know so my kids can know. My kids are half black and half white. But guess what? I'll just give you one little thing here. When I first moved into Spotsylvania with my 3 boys and all, and they come from, we drop them at the mall, they come home and they say, Mom, a police stopped me and asked me, do you have a PO? And innocent Munira from Kenya, who don't know these things yet, and I answered post office. And my husband was a Caucasian, just laughs. It's like, no, that's probation officer. So you see, there's all these things that underlying and influencing our kids to almost, this is what we expect from you. So we all adults need to wake up and help our kids and help ourselves and be out there to really say the truth about where we come from. And black is the color that started anyway.
Felicia, would you respond to just some grace and blessing that you received from the previous panel?
Yes, and you actually used the first word I was going to use, which Miss Gray talked about. She simply said, we have to extend grace and learn what we don't know together. We just don't know. Learn it together. And even with our Caucasian brothers and sisters, putting them in the framework so that they could be comfortable without knowing. It's okay for you not to know because I don't know, but we can learn together. And throughout the forum, I have been so empowered to see the level of diversity among our local colleges and universities. Dr. Ray, who works at Germanna over the Truth and Reconciliation Plan, that is powerful to have a woman of color leading this particular division at Humana. And even Dr. Hudson at the University of Mary Washington, our voice is being heard. And these are the type of changes that it's going to take. And I always tell people, let's not forget that white folks were the abolitionists who helped slavery end. So to Mr. Cohen, the teacher at Colonial Forge, it is a blessing to hear that his AP courses are diverse because we don't hear those things. Let me say, I haven't heard that in Stafford. I've heard about the push to get our AP courses to be more diverse. So this has just been a wealth of knowledge, encouragement, and empowerment as we're moving forth to change and better our community.
Wonderful. I have heard quite a bit, and it seems like we're pointing and deflecting. So my question, since we are involved with families, we are ministering to them, we have access to children. Apostle Brown, can you share some things that you are doing to educate in regards to Black history from your position?
Well, thank you for the question. And I certainly don't want to point my finger at anyone. I point my finger at myself first. And I said, shame on me for not being more involved, not being more active. Given my various positions and offices, I can do more. But in the terms of educating about Black history or where we come from in the church setting, to me, that's kind of hard because we're in the situation now where COVID is pretty much taken over and we're relegated to doing things on social media, Zoom and all this. We do this. But I believe the real impact is going to take place, like someone else has already said, in the home. Parents need to be involved in their children's education. Parents need to ask the hard questions. Parents need to go to the school meetings. I've heard it for many years. They say, pastors should be doing this and pastors should be doing that. Well, the pastors cannot parent other people's children. So based on this particular panel and the things I've learned, I promise you that education in terms of Black education, what's going on in the schoolhouses, how we can better inject ourselves into the discussion and the solutions, I will be more involved. But I cannot give you a concrete, this is what I will do tomorrow. But I do acknowledge that many other churches, they are doing that, and I applaud that.
Okay. Pastor Allen, would you briefly respond to that as well in regards to?
Yeah, that's a great question. And for us at Agape Fellowship, Black history is our history. Black history is biblical history, and it is synthesized in everything. If you hear a sermon, you are listening to Black history. I really like to bring this home with our young people. I tell the young people, I know you've been racially profiled, but guess what? So was Jesus. You don't believe me? Let me show you in the text. They looked at Jesus and his disciples and they said, you know what? Your speech betrays you. The way you dress betrays you. We're going to have to deal with you because you're not one of us. You're from another place. The same thing that happens to us today. So there is no separation for us. And we really try to empower the body to think of Jesus and the people we read about. They are people of color.
Thank you so much. And when I mentioned earlier about pointing, I hear in our conversation, they need to be teaching this in school. They need to put this in textbooks, that sort of thing. But it somewhat eliminate us as parents or as an adult. I remember growing up, every single person that was an adult was your teacher. It was pushed in the community and among the people that I was raised, you will get your education. But it seems today there's a lack, and it may go back to what the previous panel talked about, our lack of knowing ourselves. So could it be that we are deflecting and expecting others to do what we may need to get more involved? So Ms. Muhammad, would you respond to that? Do you feel that the community, people as a whole, are looking for somebody else to do some of the things that they can do themselves?
Thank you for that question. And I smile behind this mask because the first time I heard Minister Farrakhan, his question was over the air. He was speaking at Howard University. And he said, why do you wait for other people to get up and do for you what you can get up and do for yourself? And that resonated in me because growing up in downtown Fredericksburg, we had church, school, and community. It was one. All of that, like you said, if I saw you at church, I saw you at my school. My family was a part of the greater community. So we all got to work together. In our classes, we asked the first question when someone comes to us, who is the original man? The original man is the Asiatic Black man, maker, owner, cream of the planet Earth, God of the universe. When you can put that in your children, it doesn't matter what community they walk in, because they're walking in the spirit and image of God. But that's our job to do at home, to send them to school fortified. That's the responsibility of the parent. That would break that cycle of discipline problems. It would break the cycle of expulsion going to criminals in the street, criminality going into prison, and we would break the school to prison pipeline. We have to see our connection in every facet of life. So as a mom, it was important that my children understood they were loved, in the home. They were loved by their community. They were known in the school. I was an active parent in the school with my children. That is what we have to do today. So parents have the responsibility, but we also have a generation of young people who are parents who fell through the gap. And so that's where that grace comes in that Sister was talking about. We have to reach back. So one of the things that we have a womanhood training class. We have a manhood training class. Our sisters are taught how to keep house, how to rear your children, how to take care of your husband, how to sew, cook, and how to act and abroad, how to be civilized. Our men are taught being men, taking care of families, being a maintainer, being a provider. This is education, and this is what real education is. So that any other educational institution that we go into, we are able not only to survive, but we can thrive. And then our children can find out what their potential is, then they can come back and give to the communities and keep us secure.
Yes, for certainly. That family unit is critical. Matter of fact, that was the first institution that God created, was the family unit, and that was before the church. Chaplain, would you, Abdalla, would you respond to that as well? And do it appears that we, and you want to unmute, it appears that we want to get others to do what we need to step up and be more involved in.
That's right. Pointing fingers is the easy way, isn't it? But we need to all grow up and point to ourselves first before we got, one finger pointing at you, Pastor, pointing at me. So I have to look at those four things right there. Now, again, it's all about the family, because that's how it started. Adam and Eve started that way. At the same time, we got to remember, we got that in our face, though not completely enough, which is basically the devil. And we all know that, whether you're Muslim, Christian, or Jew, we all know that. He's an A student and we are C and D students. So we need to start being parents. And a child is not brought up by just mom and dad. We're older people, so we know the community was our parents. You do something bad, it'll reach home before you reach home, and you're gonna get it. So it is our responsibility for us to really teach our kids, whether it's in church, the synagogue, or the masjid. It is part of it, because a pastor, guess what? You are kind of a father to everybody who's coming in there, and it's the responsibility. And I have in our interfaith meetings sometimes say, sometimes I think that we pastors have failed also. We just tell them the nicey stuff and not tell them the hard stuff. And we all need to help our young kids, because Satan is working day and night, and we go to sleep as they're still working. So it is upon us. God's going to ask us, what did you do? So we all need to continue doing that.
Yes, we certainly do. I had another experience in my life in regards to education and Black history. I'm going to share that with you, and then I would like for you guys to answer the question or respond to the question I asked at the end. I went to the African American Museum in Washington, and as I toured and read and studied, as well as getting that education that was not in any statue or any remnant that was there, just looking at the public who went through. And to me, watching all the other race go from slot to slot, station to station, and read every bit of writing, but to look at my own race run and race through the museum, not taking the time to even look or pay attention, and that lack of reading. I'm not criticizing that. That was just the education I got at that point, as if we don't appreciate our history. So my question to the panel, do you believe today that more people around the world is interested in Black history specifically, but history as a whole. So I'm going to start with Ms. Muhammad, and then I'll follow with Felicia, if you will, and then Pastor Brown. And I would like for all three of you to respond to that. Do you believe there is this hunger, this thirst, and people are around the world interested specifically in Black history and history as a whole?
Yes, sir. You know, Bishop Lacey, I went to the museum, and as powerful as it is, it's also painful. And then after the pain, and we go through the emotion of a lot of what we saw, because yes, it would take weeks to digest. And in some cases, you can't just bite it and get it and leave. So one thing that I know in our family, we've made several trips. So we might go one time and then we talk about it and then we'll go another time because it's a lot to take in. Another factor is what's being shown there is only a comma in our history. It's a pause. And nobody has yet celebrated or reminded that we are great people from a great heritage. And that which sits on the site in Washington, D.C. is a moment. So we celebrate Benjamin Banneker and making the clock. But when you find out that you've started time, but nobody talks about that. And so our young people, they can't make that connection. And they're coming up in a society of pain. They've come up in a society where they've been told they're nothing to speak of. So then to go and see this, to see what was done, and not have a full understanding, it's a lot to digest. I heard my brother, Pastor Brown, speak about some of the things that he's able to speak of in the church and not. But the church has to cradle our babies and bring this history to them in a moment and let them know it's in a vacuum. But your history is also at the base of the pyramid. Your history is putting sun out there. Your history is in the genetic makeup of everybody walking the planet Earth. Nobody's been found beyond you. So then when they go and see the pain part of it, they can understand that, but after the pain, then they know now we can go back and rebuild. Because a lot of times people are saying, you know, should Black people have their own? Should Black people separate? When you look at the monument, it should make you want to separate from people who've done these things to you. But what kind of mind will we carry? Will we carry God's mind into separation? Or are we going to take the mind that we grew up in? You know, we're born in sin, shaped in iniquity. We have to get back to God's mind in order to build his kingdom, so that the next monument reflects God's and God's work and his transformation on us. So I think that's powerful that we have it. I think our people have a lot of pain. It's going to take a lot to digest walking through that. Those who come from around the world, they're coming to see, is it true? Did that really happen? And they're taking the time to read it with a curiosity. And then they'll have to go back home and start thinking, did I have a part of it? What can I do to help if I'm going to? Historically, am I responsible? So the pushback that we're getting in a lot of places, we have to look at what is the root. And I think Sister Munira said it, The root is Satan. So truth hurled at falsehood knocks its brains out. All the falsehood, all that happened to us there in that period of time, that's sitting there on that square in Washington, D.C., we have a lot in front of it and we have a lot yet to come. So going forward, we are taught that God has come and that he is going to establish a universal government of peace wherein we all can live in peace together. That's what we should be striving for. After we see that, our brain should say, never again.
Thank you. The truth certainly will set us free, and this is what we have to get out front, but we got to know it in order to teach it. Apostle Brown, would you respond? Do you feel that Black history, and specifically in history totality, is being thirsted and hungered by the people around the world?
My short answer is yes, but in degrees. We talked about this, like, for example, we're on this panel now. If I was not on this panel, I would not have learned certain things. Potentially, this panel, this broadcast can be put out on Facebook and the world can hear and see and replay and replay and replay. I go back to this. Many people have said, well, I'm raised in the Fredericksburg area, Stafford area. Well, I was raised in Chicago. I spent 22 years in the military going around different places. So I've experienced many cultures. I experienced a lot of stuff that was just not right. But in true confession, not too long ago, matter of fact, December, I witnessed a Kwanzaa celebration and I saw them play everything out. Then I was on a panel and I had to talk about, well, I chose to talk about faith. And I admit, even then, I've been through my whole life. I'm in my 60s, a young 60, but I heard about Kwanzaa. My parents did not teach me about Kwanzaa. I did not learn it in any type of school. But my takeaway was, when I went back and researched my history, my Black history, that's beyond the US, I was astonished. So I understand that yes, there's a certain level of excitement, but it may be minimal and it's in degrees. One last point. This is a very distinguished panel, highly educated people that have been in the schoolhouse, been in universities, and also in the churches. This is what we need at all levels: educated, knowledgeable people that can also relate on the spiritual level. So I'm just eating all this up. And I do say, let's put it out for the world to see, and let's have more discussions of this nature. I really appreciate everyone.
Thank you so much. And you guys know we are here getting near the end, and education and the impartation will go for a lifetime and even beyond. But I do want the other two panelists to respond to my question. Do you believe that there's a thirst and hunger regarding specifically Black history and history as a totality among the people around the world? Chaplain, Abdalla, unmute.
Okay. The thirst is there. But again, it has to start from home. Everything has to start from home. And like, for instance, I am originally half African and half Arab. But because of our parents, we got to find out about our history, about whether we were colonized or we were protected and all that kind of thing. But again, where did it start? From home? And then because of that, you try to find out more. And then now you come into a different culture, you want to know. And that's one thing that I also try to help the refugees, is the acculturation piece, trying to make sure that they keep their culture. Don't come to America and forget about where you come from. take the best of America and make sure you keep your own culture. You know, so yes, the thirst is there, and if conversations go on, it will make the others who are sleeping, as far as trying to know where they come from, to maybe say, what about me? I don't know that. So these conversations, when they go on, it will wake the others up to want to know about where they come from. And it has to be everywhere.
Okay. And certainly I just saw a little a post that we should not teach to assimilate. Pastor Allen.
Yes, I'm in agreement with the panel. Yes, I believe there's a worldwide agitation and hunger to not only learn about our culture, but the culture and ethnicity of so many people. And I was reflecting upon what you said, Pastor Lacey, about the rushing through the museum. And I reflected on the many times I've gone to the museum and I rushed through the museum. Why did I rush through certain parts? Because I had to revisit areas of grief that my white brother doesn't understand, that my Asian brother doesn't understand. But when I go through the area, that portion of the museum that talks about lynching, I think about my father. So my father was almost lynched. So certain areas are painful for me. And as we are educating ourselves, I want us to just remember to give room to our grief. There's a book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Dr. Joy DeGree, and she talks about that trauma. So a lot of times as we're educating ourselves, we're also revisiting traumas of the past. Unmute, Pastor Lacey, unmute.
Okay, thank you. I was calling that out myself. I was reading something in the chat. Let me go back here, and it was to Pastor Brown. Now, where did it go? Says Pastor Brown, I wonder if it is possible to truly profess Christianity and the practice of love if we have not tried in some way to sharpen our skills in listening. Do you agree? Are pastors today having us to learn to listen, to communicate with those who don't understand their white privilege, and to guide them into the facts of the truth? Is there enough there, Pastor Brown, for you to respond? Do you agree that pastors today helping us to learn to listen, to communicate with those who do not understand their white privilege, and to guide them into the facts of the truth?
I agree that the pastors after God's own heart do their very best to take the time to listen. And we talked about grace and mercy, and then we also roll up in true love. It doesn't matter if you're a pastor or a lay person. We can take the time to listen. If we listen, we can understand. And this is part of the communication now, where we come from different perspectives. Well, I'm Black in America, and this is my experience. I'm white in America, this is my experience. Can we listen to each other and emphasize with each other, and then not be at odds? We don't have to go to blows because we disagree. And so I don't put it, y'all heard me say this before, I don't lay everything at the pastor's feet. The pastors are human. They're constantly learning and adjusting, praying, trying to acquire this type of love that's patient and tolerant that we preach about and we teach about, but have difficulty doing. And do I agree? Are pastors today helping us to learn to listen? Yes. To communicate with, to those who don't understand their white privilege, and to guide them to the facts and the truth. Yes, each in its own way. When we look at the church, which is the universe, the body of Christ, if we get away from my denomination in my organizational rules and step back and end it by saying this, make the attempt to understand one another. Some things you cannot legislate. We want laws, but some stuff is not going to be found in the law. It's going to be found in us seeing each other as people, not the enemy.
Well, thank you. Thank this panel so much. I have learned and have been filled by you guys tremendously this evening. And we could sit here and talk for weeks in to come and learn from one another and sharpen. I do want to thank the NAACP and Madam Chair for hosting this evening. I pray and hope that this will not be the last. We do need the dialogue. I raised that question about, do we think there's a hunger? And I do believe that there is. And I'm basing it up on, somebody said, do some research and talk about the facts. I believe in 1926, a historian and journalist, Carter Woodson, started the Negro History Week. And he started it because there was no history being taught in public schools. But from Negro History Week, we will be starting in 2 days celebration of an entire month of Black history. And if humanity, all of us, parents and just people who are not parents, if we would get involved and help, we can turn this into a year around instead of a week. It's going to move to a month. We can make this a year-round celebration. What can we do? Adults can be active and participate while encouraging understanding and make the knowledge of Black history and all history go forth. Not only that, we can participate by going to these different places and sharing and giving some insight. I believe we have perhaps gotten into the place where we're allowing social media and games and gadgets to minister and teach us rather than us spend some time with our youth. Yes, there is a reason why that has occurred. It's because we have gotten away from our true upbringing and gotten away from the truth, what sets us free. So I don't want to preach, but I do want to thank the NAACP for allowing me to be a part of this. I pray and hope that each of us will be responsible now that we have gotten a measure of education, that we will be encouraged and now pushed to advocate and get active in being a part of what's going on. So I turn it over to Madam President Yolanda Russell. Thank you again. I appreciate this, and I'm speaking for the panel as well. Thank you for letting us be a part.
Thank you. Thank you again, Bishop. You know, I have to thank you guys tremendously. And I hope for everyone watching that this forum was as informative, engaging, and I'm just overwhelmed, enlightening, okay? I have learned so much. And I know I have made a tremendous number of friends from this panel. You may not know this yet, but you will very soon. But I'll tell you, while listening to the panelists speak, I thought of something James Baldwin said. Hold on, I've got it right here. He said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can change until it is faced. We've been here before, and we will keep on until that change is realized. You know, when we cheat all Americans, okay, let me say it this way. When we cheat ourselves of learning our history, we cheat our children and we cheat our future. Now here we have lots of work to do. The NAACP indeed has lots of work to do. We must make permanent our right to vote on all levels. We need to make sure that we're right on getting livable wages, our right to build our own businesses. We have the right to live wherever we choose. So in addition to working for all of that and making that permanent, we are working to ensure that history is presented factually. And I heard the word truth so many times. I am in total agreement with you. There is no more hiding the truth. The Stafford NAACP's theme for 2022 is educate to advocate, then activate. So listen, come on board with us, join us, find out how you can contribute to the achievement of these goals for 2022 and beyond. I'd like to, if you guys would just indulge me for a minute, I would like to thank Karen Long and her religious affairs and EEA ad hoc committees and the communications, press and publicity committee chaired by Princess Franchi. They did a wonderful job in collaborating and bringing this forum together. I also, again, I cannot thank you all enough. You all have just picked up a new sister, okay? And that's me. So Yolanda Roussel will be calling you. And of course, Bishop Lacey, you are an absolute jewel. We thank you so much for taking on the position here today as our moderator. Now, I am going to, I'll say this one more thing. Look for what the NAACP will be doing in February and in March, but stay with us because we are moving and we will be continuing situations and forums and presenting things like this to you in the very near future, okay? With that, I'm gonna close. And I'm going to ask our chaplain, unofficial chaplain, but chair of the religious committee, Karen Long, to close us out in prayer. Karen?
May the strength of God sustain us. May the power of God preserve us. May the hands of God protect us. May the way of God direct us.
Amen.
May the love of God go with us this day and forever. Amen.
Amen. Amen. God bless you all and thank you all. Have a good rest of the day.